So now we want to set up some options for RAM. So there's going to be two things here. One, we need to give them the option to choose how much RAM they actually want in terms of megabytes, gigabytes, etc. But we also want to give them the option to have that whether it's a single module or double modules, etc. So there's a couple of different ways we're going to do this. So the first and easiest part of this section is just to basically create the label so people know that, we've dealt with processor, we've dealt with video, graphics card, now we're dealing with RAM. So we just want to call this something like RAM label. Okay, so same deal as before, LBL, RAM, we could call it RAM description or RAM desk, something like that, okay? And this is just a bog standard label. So tk.label, put that on the window, same as before. Give it some text. So this is just going to be something simple like RAM options, something like that. Okay. And then we might want to increase the font just by copying and pasting. So we've got a consistent font size all the way through. Okay, same deal as before. We put that on the grid in the place we would like it to be. Okay, so we still want it in column 0 because we're still, we're still in that first column. It is really just the label for that first column, but we want to move the row down so that it's underneath the rows we've already got. So this is going to be row 6 or row 7. So, you should be able to count and figure out now which is the next row down. Going to do a little bit of pad, the same as before. So 5 above. Okay, I'm going to bring it in slightly from the side just so it's not got that, right up to the edge look about it. And then we want to sticky that to the left again. So let's run this. Okay, so that's fine. Now we've got the RAM options here, but now we want to create this drop down just here so people can choose how much RAM they actually want from a drop down list. Now before we can do that, we need to define a variable which will contain list, and it's the list that we're going to call on when we use the drop down box, the combo box. So it's a basic standard Python list. If you've used lists before, you define these pretty much the same way with square brackets. Okay, so but mine's going to be in a variable so that everything's going to be stored in RAM options. And we need a couple of square brackets, okay, like this. And then we just want to put in here now what RAM we want. So if we don't want any RAM, we obviously want 0. Now, again, today you might want to think about, what that looks like in terms of how much RAM you actually get when you order parts, at today's prices and at today's sizes. But for the purposes of understanding how this works, we could have, say, 1 gig of RAM, or we could have 2 gig of RAM, or we could have 8 gig of RAM, or 16 gig of RAM, 32 gig of RAM. So we can just build a list. I think it's unlikely in this day and age anybody's going to want 1 or 2. So we could just go with a simple list of 8, 16, 32, whatever number you think works well for you in here. You'll need a comma after the last number just there. And these need to be square brackets. So all we're doing here is we're saying, here's a list of numbers, store them in a variable called RAM options so that when we use this variable later on, it knows that there's these 4 numbers stored inside it. Right, now we need a combo box because we want to be able to basically allow people to pick 8, 16, 32, etc. from the combo box. So I can just call this combo or com or something like that, so that we know we're dealing with a combo box here. Okay, so I can just call it combo RAM. There's only going to be one combo box on here, but I still like to give things names because I think it just makes it easier and makes it clearer to understand. Okay, so this time we're using the TTK library because it's the newer version of the library. So we need to put TTK, not just TK. And it is called combo box with a capital C. All right, and then we stick that on the window as usual. Okay, this time we define width. Okay, we're not writing anything on this combo box because we're going to use this list of numbers, but we still need to define how wide we would like the combo box to be. So we've got a maximum of 2 numbers currently, so we could just have it as a width of 2 or 3, or just to make it look a bit tidier, go for something a little bit wider. It's entirely up to you as to how wide you would like this to be, but it's obviously got to be wide enough to contain whatever numbers you've put in the RAM option there. So at least 2 characters wide there. Okay. Now we want basically to tell it to use the variable that we used earlier on. So the value is going to be RAM underscore options, and use those numbers that we had defined in that variable earlier on. Okay, so now we put it on the grid, combo underscore ram dot grid. Okay, and now we need to decide what columns and rows we want these things to be. So it's going to be column 1 because I want it in the middle, and it's going to be row the same as the label above. So I put mine on 7, and I can use sticky if I want to, just to put it on the left, or when you look at it you might decide you don't like it and you prefer it in the middle, and you can do sticky east west instead. Okay, so let's look. What does that look like? Okay, looking okay. Now we should know, if we've done this correctly, see that list is now appearing in this drop down. You see, I've made it 5 wide. It looks a bit tidier compared to the rest. If we extended it a little bit more, maybe 7. Okay, now it's about the same width as the options above it. Okay, but you could just have it as 2 if you wanted to, but you can choose how wide you would like that to be. Okay, so now we want basically to define what happens when we select that number. So we need a couple of extra lines just here. Okay, so we've got combo RAM. Now what we want to do is use something called dot current, and we want to make 0 the default choice, and we also want to bind it to the mouse press, so that Python knows that we've selected 8, 16, or 32, etc. Okay, and you use something called dot bind, and then in quotes we choose combo box selected. Now this is something Python understands, but because it's something we're doing either from the keyboard or the mouse, we have to put these pointy brackets either end like this. Okay, so that will tell Python that when we select a number from that list, it knows that we've selected something. It knows which one that we've selected. Okay, So there's an entry box that we want to do next so that people can actually type in what they want from the end of that one. And there's a couple of other things we need to do, obviously, just to put those prices on the end there. So the next thing we can do is the RAM price. And we can just call this something like label price or something like that. We're going to make a slight change in a minute by giving people the option to have more modules that they can buy in pairs, because that's quite often the case on motherboards, but it doesn't affect the price, so we can put the price on now. Okay, so that's just going to be a standard TK dot label. Okay, same as before. Put it on the window. Okay, and we want the text to equal 0, just like we did before, and we might want to copy and paste. So we've got the consistency in the font size just there. Okay, and then put this on the grid. Okay, so I've got grid. Okay, and we just need to figure out where it needs to go. So it's in column 2 because it's at the end. And we might want to put it on row 7. Once we've put the option for the modules in, it might look a bit out of place, but we can just move it down to row 8 if it looks a bit odd. Okay, and I'm just going to put a little bit of Y padding just to move it down from the top. Right, so what does that look like? Okay, something's not right. Oh, I've missed out a comma just there. Okay, so we've got ability to choose a processor, the ability to choose some RAM, and then prices to appear just here. So what we'll do next is we'll put this entry box in so they can choose how many different modules of RAM they want.